Before We Go, and Before Sunrise. Read with lowercase letters are two ominous sentence fragments. However, read with capitalization, they're the title of two incredibly similar rom-coms. And when I say incredibly similar, I mean they basically have the same plot, wherein two strangers walk around a foreign city for a night, fall in love, but they have to part ways in the morning because each person has to go back to their own lives. Now this concept seems pretty straightforward, so it's not impossible that each movie was derived independently of one another. But the general plot isn't where the similarities end. And trust me, there are a lot of them. Before we discuss these similarities, let's look at a brief history of each of these movies. Before Sunrise came out in 1994 and was directed and written by the master of making the monotony of life mildly interesting, Richard Linklater. In the movie, two early 20-somethings walk around Vienna before the guy, Jesse, has to catch a flight back to America, and this girl, Celine, has to get on a train to France. It soon became a cult classic, making its way onto a myriad of blogger lists recommending it for Valentine's Day. Fast forward to 2014, Chris Evans made his directorial debut with Before We Go, a movie where two 30-somethings walk around New York before Chris Evans, or Nick, which is his character's name, has to go to a band audition. Yes, Captain America plays trumpet in this world. And the woman Brooke has to go back to her life in Boston. This movie spawned so many review articles and a comment from my friend Zach bashing it for being too comparable to the aforementioned Linklater film. Considering how much I love Before We Go, I felt very apprehensive to accept that this masterpiece was just a ripoff of an early 90s indie movie I'd never seen before. And after looking at who wrote Before We Go, I felt even more apprehensive, despite 3 of the writing credits barely having any work to their names. The main writer, Ronald Bass, screenplayed a lot of movies that people like to say they've watched when they want to seem cultured, including Rain Man and Emily. Also, Stella got her groove back, but we don't talk about that. Upon taking the time to watch Before Sunrise, I realized that the similarities go way farther than the general plot summary. A lot of the individual events that take place are eerily the same, and this doesn't even include the word before appearing at the beginning of both of the titles and the runtimes being almost exactly the same, including credits. While in Before Sunrise they meet on a train and in Before We Go they meet at a train station, in both movies they walk around a city neither of them are from with no money, they get readings from a psychic, they talk about their lives and relationships, they go to bars and venues featuring music, they pretend to have phone calls with people that aren't there. The movies end fairly ambiguously, and all of this happens before sunrise. I mean literal sunrise, not the title of the Linklater movie. Like I said, a lot of people think that Before We Go ripped off Before Sunrise, or it's just paying a haphazard homage to a movie it was inspired by. But I disagree. I don't think that Before We Go is a sloppy salute to Linklater or a big snowman thief.
I'm a big snowman liar.
I think the reason why Before We Go feels like a funhouse mirror version of Before Sunrise is because the writers are using the same scenes and formula to highlight ideas on relationships and the barriers to love at 2 different stages of life. Before Sunrise, looking at the hopeful and aspirational mindset of youth where only distance can keep them apart. And Before We Go, looking at the reality of being a fully formed adult with responsibilities that don't have time to be hopeful. In this case, timing and the circumstances of the meeting keeps them apart. So boiled down into one versus style line, distance and hopefulness versus timing and reality. To investigate how each film differs despite having almost exactly the same series of events, let's look at each film individually, starting with Before Sunrise because it came out before Before We Go. Yes, that was a complicated sentence, and yes, I could have said it more clearly, but I didn't want to. In Before Sunrise, these two crazy kids have everything going for them. Granted, they apparently weren't rich, but money isn't everything. Both Jesse and Celine are in their early 20s, good-looking and unattached. Neither of them appear to be carrying any severe emotional baggage, like abandonment issues or a drinking problem. Through everything they say and do, you can tell these two think they have all the time in the world. I mean, this one decided to spend 2 months riding trains in Europe because he wanted to be alone. And this one got off a train 1,200 miles from home despite planning to meet someone the next morning on a whim. All because she thought, yeah, this guy seems cute and stable enough. Because a strange man telling you they saw the ghost of their dead grandmother in a sprinkler doesn't give off serial killer vibes at all.
And through the mist, I could see my grandmother. And she was just standing there, and then I dropped the hose, and she disappeared.
Jackpot, am I right, ladies? While in Vienna, all they do is aimlessly saunter around the city, picking activities at random with no sense of urgency, even though they assume this is the only time they'll ever be together, and they were invited to see this guy's play. That note, they never end up going to. And how in the hell can you pass up seeing a play like this?
It's an actor in a cow costume.
And he's the cow?
Yes, I am the cow. Throws a stick, she fetches it and brings it back, and she can smoke with hoofs.
Instead of doing anything of value, they spend their time talking about their ideas on love and philosophy and literature. However, they don't talk like people. Their youthful, aspirational mindset shows through their monologue-like speech. where they talk like they know everything and the only thing that matters in life is their dreams and ideas.
I think I can really fall in love when I know everything about someone. Knowing the exact story to tell in a given situation. I'm sure that's when I know I'm really in love.
And in the end, when it's time for them to go back to their real lives, they make a rushed decision that they want to see each other again. So they vow to meet at that exact same time and place only 6 months in the future. They don't exchange numbers or addresses because they feel like communicating long distance would diminish their emotional connection. They have zero backup plan just in case something happens. They don't even know each other's last names. They're so high on love and being young that they assume that nothing could possibly happen between now and then. And spoiler for the next movie, Before Sunset, where they meet 10 years later, Celine's grandmother ends up dying the day before they plan to reunite, and she has to go to the funeral instead of living out this romantic fantasy they both think is happening. Now let's talk about Before We Go. Opposite to Before Sunrise, these people have gone through some stuff that they're both currently either in or haven't gotten over. If in Before Sunrise they had no baggage, in Before We Go, these people are carrying trunks full of their own unique mixture of dead bodies and sandbags. Nick and Brooke have to consider what they've been through and what they want in life because they're older and don't have all the time in the world, as opposed to Mr. and Mrs. Philosophy over there. That's right, I'm talking to you guys. As opposed to romantically deciding to get off a train together, Nick and Brooke meet at the train station just as it's closing for the night. Nick is there because he's avoiding going to a wedding that his ex is going to. Oh, and that ex broke up with him after a 6-year relationship 30 seconds before he was going to propose. And the only reason Brooke is even in New York is because she was secretly leaving her cheating husband, but ends up in the train station because she makes a split-second decision to go back to Boston to fix her marriage and ends up missing the last train. They don't meet because of side glances or flirtatious advancements like in Before Sunrise, and they don't journey around this foreign city together because they thought it would be cute. The only reason they started talking is because Nick saw her miss her train, felt bad for her, and wanted to help her find her way back to Boston. And they stay together through the night because they made a connection. And this connection doesn't start to form over seemingly rehearsed monologues about philosophy implying that they know everything. It forms over realistic, down-to-earth talk about their lives, their baggage, and how directionless they both are.
You were fine.
No, I wasn't. That was awful. It's embarrassing. I'm sorry you had to see that. I think after 6 years of rehearsing that moment, I'd have something more interesting to say.
They're older and more practical than the Before Sunrise characters. They don't have time to talk about nothing and go around a city for no reason. They have their own stuff to deal with. And in the morning, when Brooke has to get on the train and go back home like in Before Sunrise, they don't make a split-second decision to stay in contact or make a lofty plan to meet again. They acknowledge the reality of their lives and the fleeting nature of the night they spent together. Brooke could have chosen to not go back to Boston to work it out with her husband and instead made a life with Nick, but she left to save the relationship she was more certain of and invested more time into. The more realistic option. Now you may think that's just how she is. Realistic and practical. Well, you would be wrong. At one point, she does recognize she was like the kids in Before Sunrise. Not explicitly, but in so many words.
The funny thing is, I remain proud of it to this day, that I was the girl who recognized love and jumped.
But now that she's older and has a husband and a stepchild, she's less comfortable taking that leap with Nick. Because every time you leap, you have to start over again. Timing is the thing that changed her decision. And now we get to the part of the video that isn't necessary to support my point, but there's one scene mirrored in both movies that I really wanted to talk about because I really like it. So now let's venture into a case study of a scene that I've affectionately and uncreatively titled, the phone call scene. In both movies, each character pretends to talk on the phone with a character that isn't there with them. However, who they pretend to speak to differs wildly between each movie and perfectly reflects the barrier between love at each stage of life. Or at least that's what I think. It's my video. In Before Sunrise, both characters have fake phone conversations in front of each other talking about how much fun they're having and how they're falling in love.
And he's so cute. He has beautiful blue eyes, nice pink lips, greasy hair.
Gross. The people they're pretending to talk to aren't figments of their imagination. They're recreating their real-life friends that are geographically distant from them in that moment. This parallels Celine and Jesse's reason for why they only have one night. If they lived closer together, this Before Sunrise situation could have turned into an entire relationship. But they don't. Just like how their friends aren't there because they're in completely different countries, distance is the limiting factor in their story. Now let's look at Before We Go. Nick and Brooke also share a moment conducting imaginary phone calls with real people they know. But not really. Instead of talking to friends or family, they're pretending to have conversations with themselves in the past. Unlike Jesse and Celine, the two most hipster people in the world, they don't blurt out their feelings in the least subtle way possible. They share advice with their past selves on how to get to the moment that they're in, where they eventually find each other.
You're gonna be playing one night, Grand Central, thinking of every reason in the world to not go see the girl that broke your heart. And you're gonna meet somebody. But, stick with her. You're gonna need her a lot more than she needs you.
Because of the circumstances of their meeting, they know it would be inappropriate for them to express how they feel about the other person. So instead, they opt to do it in a more thematically appropriate and arguably more beautiful way. They're not trying to overcome distance like in Before Sunrise, because they both live fairly close to New York. The thing preventing them from developing their relationship is time. So going back to all the reviews criticizing Before We Go for being too similar to Before Sunrise. While there may be extremely similar plot points and overtly lifted elements from Linklater's film and Evans' movie, I don't think the makers of Before We Go were trying to hide it in the obscurity of the film. I think they used so many obvious references to highlight perspectives on love as people grow up. A couple of years makes a big difference in the span of a lifetime. What's important to you when you're 20 might drastically change when you're 30. But no matter where you are in life, there's always the chance of finding someone you connect with and not having it work out. Because regardless of time and place, sometimes love just isn't enough. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel, and I'll talk to you guys next week. Bye.